Thank you all for inviting me. Silvia Puente, who sent me a letter and asked me to come. And thank you all that are gathered here, my friend Julio from Alma and all the other members. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. There you are, people. The light really doesn't let me see my friends, your faces out there. There's a lot. I know you're going to have a broader conversation, but I think there's a lot that we can learn from each of our movements. And I first want to use the intersection between the gay lesbian community and the immigration rights community in the Senate bill when it became clear that the road to success in the Senate bill was going to be the exclusion of any protections to the gay and lesbian community in that bill. That is, we were not going to treat gay and lesbian immigrants the same way we were going to treat heterosexual immigrants. And for those of you who don't remember, there just came a time in which Lindsey Graham and others said, if you adopt this measure. And the interesting thing, this was the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. It was the only thing he wanted, but he couldn't have it. Because to have it was to mean that we would not pass immigration reform. And I remember that day because I thought of sometimes just the shallowness, sometimes you can call it the hypocrisy, sometimes the way Washington sees, but yet we took the bill, the Senate bill, remember everybody, and said, this is the gold standard for immigration. And I kept saying to myself, well, sometimes in Washington, D.C. speak, if you go against it, they say, pero ¿qué te pasa, Luis? Well, it wasn't the gold standard. We left millions of people out. And not only that, it was to show you where we're at today, right? I mean, I would vote for the Senate bill at a heartbeat. And I know everybody in this room would support me in doing that. But I got to tell you, not only did we leave them, just think about diversity visas that were gone, also gone. And then think about the fact that in 10 years under the Senate bill, you can't get a sibling into this country. I mean, when you think about 20,000 more Border Patrol agents and $40 billion more on the border, you can go on and on and on and look at the Senate bill and say, wow. All the debate, right, in Washington, D.C. is always about Obamacare, right? Except when it comes to the Senate bill, because we were excluded. That means for the next 13 years, if you join the program, you don't qualify for any means-tested program, including Obamacare. But specifically, the first principles around the Senate bill was what? You do not qualify for. It was a negative, right? It wasn't what you qualify for, but what you don't qualify for, because nobody wanted to have a debate or a discussion that 11 million people might need health care. But you know what? I'd vote for that bill. So that kind of brings us to where we're at today. And I just want to tell you. So I've always said, look, as I negotiate with, if that's what you had to do in the Senate, where Democrats were in the majority, imagine what you have to do to negotiate in the House, where Republicans are in the majority, and they came to the table in November of 2012. How did Republicans come to the table? Self-deportation, we'll veto the DREAM Act, and we love SB 1070. It should be replicated in 49 other states. Esas son la gente que yo tengo que negociar. That's who I started negotiating with. You know, we went a long way. And we did a lot of different things with them. And then they had their principles. And that's why I always said, and this was to some chagrin from sectors of the immigrant community, I said, mira, si va a ser ciudadanía para todos, de una manera clara e inmediata, entonces no va a haber reforma para nadie. Para mí eso es claro. Y para aquellos que dicen, pero Luisito, ¿cómo? It's not what I'm giving up. It is the very nature of the debate and the discussion. If you want citizenship for all, you will get justice and you will get relief for no one in the House of Representatives. What does that mean? That I also understand that tomorrow. So when you look at the LGBTQ community, look at it. I remember in 1990, it was such a long time ago, I forgot the year. It was 96, 97, and they passed DOMA. 60 of us, out of 435, only 60 of us voted against it. I remember voting against DOMA and people say, it's going to be the end of your political, how could you do that? You're in such a minority of people. Today, there are over 170 members of the House of Representatives that already signed the letter, but we didn't have to wait for them, did we? The Supreme Court struck down DOMA as unconstitutional, something that I understood almost 20 years ago. So what did you see? You saw evolution. And remember in the gay community, and then they said, oh, you can only have a civil union. So gay people ran up and had the civil union, right? They could show their love and their commitment to one another. And then there were some people who said, no, that's not good enough. It's true. So now we have marriage in nearly 20 states. And every time they try to block marriage, what happens? A federal court says, struck down, struck down, struck down. And you can't go anywhere because the Supreme Court already struck it down. What are you going to appeal to, a court that's already made a decision? My point is, we'll all become citizens eventually if that's what we want. But the first thing you have to do today, when you have 1,000 deportations every day, is you need to put people in a safe place. ¿De qué carajo le vale la ciudadanía a alguien who has been deported from the United States of America, who's been separated from their family? Pregúntale a la persona que está siendo deportada hoy o tiene una orden de deportación. ¿Qué tú quieres? ¿Ciudadanía? Y si no ciudadanía, una deportación y separación de tu familia, que lo más probable va a ser para siempre. Because once you're deported, brothers and sisters, es inmensamente imposible que vuelva. So my point of view was, that's kind. Even then we negotiated with Republicans, and at the end, last week, for 3 months, I've been saying, July 4th, you don't present a bill, there's no action on immigration. We move the conversation and the dialogue from the legislative, and we pivot. Now, we've pivoted before, because I remember in September of 2010, we did a pivot. We called the senators, we called Reid, we called Nancy Pelosi, and we said no more comprehensive immigration reform. It's okay if we just do the DREAM Act. As you remember, we did that in September, and we passed it in the House of Representatives in December of 2010. And when we saw that we couldn't do that, and it didn't pass, we pivoted again in January of 2011. What did we say? We're not going to get anything done legislatively. And so I traveled all across the country saying it's time to stop the deportation, and it's time for the president to act. And I don't know how many of you, we had all these actors and actresses, right, in Washington, D.C. La más linda. See? Yeah, from Desperate Housewives. What's the name of the one from Desperate? Oh, see. She would have press conferences with the president, and she would tell us all, there's nothing he can do, in that very sensual, sexy voice on Sunday night. Y tú sabes, it's okay for me. I don't want to dog the poor actress, but the truth is, she came at a time in which our movement was making what? Un reclamo. Ella decía que no se podía hacer eso. And there were a lot of them that would come to Washington, D.C. They became President Obama's new Hispanic influential. That's what he called them. He gathered, of course they were influential because they agreed with you. But out here in the neighborhoods across the United States of America, people agreed with us. And in the end, after he said, I can't do it, remember he went around the country. I'm not a king, I'm not a prince, I'm not legislation. What did he do in June of 2012? He signed an executive decree called DACA that today has given over 600,000 immigrant youth because we stayed consistent. And we said, you can do it, Mr. President, and regardless of what the actors and the actresses and toda la gente que ellos reunieron, we stayed consistent. So I just said last week we need to pivot again. Here's the legislative vehicle. I don't see anything happening. We've been telling them for 3 months, and nobody has worked closer or harder than I have to work with Republicans and to challenge Democrats. Pues ya yo estoy cansado también de los demócratas que me dicen, tú no puedes hacer eso. And you know what I told them? I said, if you wanted a Democratic bill, if you want to challenge me and what others are able to accomplish, why didn't you challenge us in 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010 when we were 250 strong? No. When you had the majority and you didn't want to risk your majority in order to give immigrants justice, you stayed silent. Y ahora que están en la minoría, qué bueno. So all I'm trying to say is, look, other thing we have to learn from the LGBTQ community is you got to keep your social right justice movement separate. There has to be some separation, right, of those that are fighting for it from the established political parties, because the established political parties may or may not take you down the right road. So Where are we at today? I think where we're at today is we're going to continue to demand. You already saw the community organizations this weekend, over 40 cities. You're going to see more of that, demanding that our friend and our ally, and the one that he's our hope, President Barack Obama, does the right thing. I believe he will. I'm going to end with this and then take some questions. Here's the entry. This past Friday, so 16 days ago, 17 days ago, Secretary Jay Johnson, Homeland Security, was in Chicago. ¿Alguno de ustedes no le estuvo pues, curioso y a la misma vez le trajo un poquito de alegría que el secretario de Homeland Security vino a Chicago a visitar los centros de detención, a ver qué es lo que estaba sucediendo ahí adentro, a venir a reunirse, porque hay algunos líderes aquí, con amplios sectores de liderazgo de nuestra comunidad pro-inmigrante, se sentaron a tener un diálogo y que pudieron hablar. I think that's a really great thing, when you can get the Secretary of Homeland Security to sit down, visit detention centers, and then meet and discuss things with our pro-immigrant community. So, he said in the Dirksen building at the end of the press conference, if the Republicans don't act by the end of July, our Department of Homeland Security is ready to act by the end of July. So it's not what I'm saying, it's what the head of Homeland Security said right here in Chicago. Everything in Washington, D.C. is gearing up. And my sense is President Barack Obama should not wait till the end of July. He should take the kinds of steps immediately. If the Republicans do not want to negotiate in good faith, the president should take his pen, pick up his telephone, and begin the action to stop these massive deportations that have an impact on our community. And that's where we at. I didn't want to be there. It was a fight and a struggle. Because, you know, politicians in Washington, D.C., they're like, oh, Luis, if you say that we have to go for executive action, then nobody will push the Republicans to sign the discharge petition. Always political, right? The discharge petition, because that gives you a political tool to hammer the Republicans, while our community is getting hammered by the administration by deportation. So we're going to move the conversation, we're going to move the dialogue, and we're going to get relief. What we saw in DACA, I believe you will see a huge expansion of DACA to many other sectors of our undocumented community. And if DACA shows anything to us, what it does show? That the president has the authority to unilaterally act under the law of the United States to protect communities, especially our immigrant community. So with that, please, if you have a couple of questions, I'd love to answer them. That's the Telemundo editorial. Y si hay algo que nosotros hemos aprendido, es que el presidente tiene el poder para actuar, para defender grandes sectores de nuestra comunidad inmigrante. Lo hizo con los jóvenes, ahora que lo haga con sus padres y con otros sectores amplios de nuestra comunidad inmigrante. Was that good enough? Okay, he got it. All right, sorry for the small editorial. You have questions, I'd love to.
Can you say anything about the president's plans on the current crisis with the Central American youth?
Thank you.
I thought I heard this morning that he was thinking of turning back or reversing that law that the Bush administration had signed that they could not be deported.
Right.
I think a lot of people didn't know that they couldn't be deported if they came from Central America.
No. Well, here's what happens. Look, we have agreements with countries. So let's first put the Central American tragedy, right, and the current crisis that we have on our border. It's a humanitarian crisis. It truly is. So it's complicated, so you have to go to the root causes, but that's why you have a policy forum, right? It's not simple. Look, just take Salvadorians. If you, as Bush did in 2001, I believe it was, after massive earthquakes, say you're going to give temporary protected status to over 100,000 Salvadorians, what do you think's going to happen 13 years later? I mean, think. What do you think? They're established, they're working. If you have the kind of rampant violence in El Salvador and Honduras and Guatemala, which threatens to undermine very civil society, I mean, come on, June 6th of this year, the former head of the Guatemalan Police Department was found guilty of a dozen murders. And you can go on. If you have a coup d'etat in 2010 in Honduras, you can go on and on and on, right? And you coming out of civil wars and civil conflicts that were never truly resolved. And then, so you're going to have this kind of, so the children are fleeing the violence. And la gente piensa, pero no, porque no se queda ahí. No, this is not forming a black party, a black club. This is not putting up signs you're going to call 911. There is no 911 to call. If you go to the State Department right now, they say that in Honduras, if you call the police, don't expect to be protected. Come on, what do you think? Of course they're going to come. And the violence is financed with our dollars. It's protected with our guns, right? And it is fueled by our consumption of the drugs. So, vamos a ser claro. And so the bringing of do you think, it's like we think that how would I say that? The criminal enterprise in Central America is going to say, oh, we only sell drugs. No. They do everything that is criminal. And I'm sure they're down there saying, look what because, it's always fun. They blame Barack Obama. Just listen to what Republicans say. What do Republicans say? It's open borders. Obama doesn't deport anybody, right? They repeat that time and time again. That as long as all you have to do is show up. So they came. And the ignorance of the situation. Now, the Central American governments also have a responsibility. So, it's a crisis. I always said, protect the children. Put them in a safe place. And we'll resolve the other issues later. Pero lo primero que tú tienes que hacer es cuidar a los niños. Pero tú viste los republicanos, you heard them at the hearings. They're bringing diseases, right? Right? They're part of the gang enterprise and criminal enterprise, children. So, look, they don't call it el tren de la muerte por sí porque sí, because it is one. We don't know how many have died on the passage from those countries here. So, here's what I believe they're going to do. And I told everybody this. They are all have orders of removal. Now, are they being placed with their parents? Yeah, about half of the children that are arriving are being placed actually with their parents. And I remember one Republican, he was going, look at this, it's terrible. They're coming and we're paying for airfare and we're having marshals to reunite them with their parents. Yeah, isn't that's what they're supposed to do. ¿Dónde carajo lo vamos a poner? We're supposed to put them. I was a social worker, so I mean, for the Department of Children and Family Services, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to reunite them with parents. And then look for grandma y la tía y un familiar antes que tú lo pongas en cualquier otro sitio. So that's kind of where we're at there. So what do I think the administration is going to do? Here's what I believe that they're going to do. I haven't had a long, extensive conversation with them. But they are going to send down judges, and they're going to hear the cases. And if they don't qualify for asylum, they are going to put them back on airplanes and send them back. That is what they're going to do. And that is part of what we should be telling people, is that if you don't have a legal standing in the United States, you can make that long, arduous trip and get absolutely no benefit. The only ones that are clear to benefit from this are the human smugglers and those that traffic in human beings. Ellos sí ganan, porque ellos te cobran y después nosotros te deportamos y tú te quedas en absolutamente con nada. Asylum is a very high standard and bar to meet. And do not think that because you have rampant and endemic violence in the community or the country you come, that that's the standard, or that poverty is the standard. It is not the standard. And many of the children, many may actually go through the system. And then you have to challenge a lawyer, a well-trained, oiled lawyer, right, in an asylum case. ¿Y eso es lo que tiene el niño de 7, 8 años? Nada. And he has to confront the system. So I'm simply saying, we have to tell them. But immigration reform is part of it. I'm going to end with this. The poorest country in Central America is Nicaragua. Nobody's coming from Nicaragua. I kept thinking, why? Because they had immigration reform, brothers and sisters. Because all of the Contras and everybody that left Nicaragua that came to the United States in the 90s, they passed NACARA. And they got the Cuban treatment, which means that by the year 2000, all of the Nicaraguans that were in the United States undocumented already became eligible for American citizenship. They brought their kids the right way. They brought their wives the right way. They reunified their families the right way. But we have had no justice. And I remember that when I introduced NACARA, it was for Salvadorians, it was for Guatemalans, it was for Hondurans, and it was for Nicaraguans. But our political system decided what? That we would play Cold War politics, y como los salvadoreños y los guatemaltecos eran los malos, y los nicaragüenses eran los buenos, we would only allow Nicaraguans to stay in this country. And I remember meeting with the sergeants and the generals and the corporals and the contras when I would go down to Miami. So all I'm trying to tell you is there's a reason we have this crisis. There's much more to it. But I think we need to have a policy. So the president asked for $2 billion to put more judges. We need $2 billion to help fortify the structures of democracy and economics and social justice in those countries, so that we take them out of the hands of the drug traffickers and we take them out of the hands. But it's going to be very, very difficult. And in the end, todos nosotros aquí tenemos una responsabilidad con esos países centroamericanos. Número uno, mandamos cientos de millones de dólares, ¿para qué? To fuel the war. And once the war was over, like Pontius Pilate, we washed our hands of Central America. And we want to know why today we have the kind of crisis that we have at our border. It's a crisis. There are many, many reasons for it. It's a humanitarian crisis. I say put the children in a safe place. But I think what you're going to see is that they're not going to have any basis upon the which to stay. Many will, but many more will not. And they will be deported back with their moms, if they came with their moms, and as children, and be repatriated. Now, I want to share with you, this is what we do. Because if you're a Mexican national, since we have an agreement with the Mexican government and you come as an unaccompanied child, you go back to Mexico quickly. And I assure you, they are probably putting together agreements with Central American countries as we speak to have the same kind of protocol that we have with unaccompanied minors that come from Mexico. One more question, because I know I have to, I'm already taking. Please, Chaco.
I'll actually ask two questions. First, to the best of your knowledge, Luis, what options may the Obama administration have other than putting these kids through asylum hearings, which, as you well know, and we may well see a repetition of what happened in the 1980s, Central American applicants, by the way, never reach more than 3% approval for asylum cases during the 1980s. And I thank you for the struggle, by the way, in trying to get that to be rectified. I don't know that we did, but the try was good enough. So that's the first question. And the second question, if you could share with us 2 or 3 concrete lessons that, in your opinion, we should learn, meaning those of us who struggle for immigrant justice and immigration reform, from the long years of struggle by the gay community in the U.S.
Well, thank you, Chacon. Number one, I would like to say, Chacon, that we would change things, but we're not. The legislative body's not going to change it. I mean, I have to tell you, I'm very proud. I am very proud of Barack Obama. I'm very proud of the Democratic Party structures, because it would have been easy to simply say, let's put more National Guard, let's reject them, let's send them back to their country, and that could have been a neat. That hasn't been the reaction. The reaction has been to call, and that's the law of the land too, that they have followed it. I think what you're going to see, Chacon, is you're going to see them, they're going to make a point of sending people back. That's from every indication. And what they're going to do is they're going to expedite the law. And because they're not going to have any attorneys, many of the cases that could have been won, because asylum cases are lost in general. I mean, to really win an asylum case, you need to really have your package of evidence well documented and put together. I don't think you're going to see that. I will tell you one thing. They won't be able to expedite a lot of them. So a lot of the children, it's true. If there's one thing that's true, a lot of the children, ya se lo mandaron. The parents are picking them up at the airport it's ironic, at Washington National, right? They arrive at the border through the treasure. They made it, they survived, and they're being reunited across the country with their parents. Literally, thousands of kids are being reunited with their parents. their parents, hopefully, in our community will be able to assist them, right? Chacon, you and I will be able to assist them to fight that process. So we'll have them. And then what can we learn? Well, I'll tell you what. The first thing I think is that we need also to be advanced. Because I got to tell you, to me, when I saw the gay, lesbian community, really, it was because, and we're starting to do that, Chacon, is that we're starting to become part of, how would I say it, everyday culture of America, right? So even on a sitcom, right, there's a gay guy or there's a lesbian woman, right? And she's not an outlier. He's not an outlier, right? He or she is a person that is loved and cared for. And in many situations, right, how would I say it? When I watch some of these programs, they're the sanest person in the family, right? Because that's a reflection, right, of the way things really work in our families. Because we all have members of the LGBT community that are our, sons, daughters, children, people that are part of our family. And we go, si todos fueran así, estaríamos bien. But unfortunately, not all our family members are like that way. So I say so we could laugh. It's okay to laugh even at very serious things, because I think underlying a lot of what happens in our society is a little bit of, tiene razón. My mom used to make me laugh just by putting on. So I think there's some of that. And I like the fact that we've got Jose Diaz-Balart at MSNBC. I think we need to have more of him because I don't see enough of it at CNN and at some of the major. Let me see. All kudos to Univision and Telemundo and Azteca and all of the Spanish, because without them, I don't know where we'd be as a community in terms of educate, but we need to do more. I'll tell you, I've had my days, Chacon, where I'm ready to go on Anderson Cooper, and I've been ready, right? Estoy listo. Me dice, a las 8:15 tiene que estar, and I put my makeup on, they go, eh. There's a sudden issue in the LGBT community that Anderson Cooper would like to discuss tonight, so you're canceled till next week, Luis. And that's happened to more than once. ¡Qué chévere! Que él puede y tiene el poder de hacer eso, o sus productores, o lo que sea. And I don't, you know something, yo no me molesto, porque esos son hermanos nuestros, muy bien. Malo que si fuera para otra gente. But it's good with me, because we're all in this movement together. And I think the most important thing, and with this, is what I talked about earlier. Tú sabes, we had Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We had marriage. We had DOMA. Can you imagine we would have put all of that in one bill? In one bill? That's what we're trying to do in the immigration movement. We put it all in one bill. Boy, I don't know. It would have been tough, right? Maybe the president would have been overwhelmed from so many sectors of society. Pero no, lo hicieron pedacito a pedacito. Organizaron en sus comunidades. And so it's kind of like you got one thing in Illinois, like we get driver's licenses, right? And we get in-state tuition, and we make things. I like, in California and in New York, they're trying to think about how they protect it by granting them some kind of state citizenship, some kind of state protection, where you're protected by the state. I mean, you have to find different ways. So if there's anything, I think it's the cumulative effect, right? As I've seen them. Because I too was saying, porque lo dejen casar. But there were some people that said, no, this is enough, and then they move forward. Whereas today, you've won such great space within our community of understanding and comprehension. And when we start back, we've come a long way. And so I'm happy to have been part of that. I still remember 1986. Porque a mí, tú sabes, I get to the city council in 1986, and I get there, and I say, great. It's been so hard to get here. I'm finally in the Chicago City Council. Gracias a Dios, right? And then, as soon as I get sworn in, Chacon, as soon as I get sworn in, what do they bring up? The gay ordinance. And I was like, that should be easy. Oh, que revolú. I voted for it. But I got to tell you, at the beginning, here's the interesting thing. I'm going to make a confession. At the very beginning, I was like, pues yo estoy para eso, right? Entonces yo dije, yo estoy para eso, de verdad. This is going to be a lot more difficult. And in the end, I voted for it. But what happened with me was there were many members of the LGBTQ community who surrounded me, educated me, guided me, helped me, right? Because they knew I was a friend, and then they saw my vacillation, huh? No sé qué voy a hacer aquí. So they helped strengthen me. And I still remember one of my greatest moments to today of embarrassment was I was leaving St. Mark's Church. Y una señora me dice, mira Luis Gutiérrez, mira este papel, me lo mandaron a mi casa. And I said, what paper is that? Lo que tu oponente se atreven a decir de ti, what your opponents saying about you. And she showed me the piece of paper, and it says fundraiser in Boys Town for Alderman Luis Gutierrez, the gay. Look, they're putting out that you're having fundraisers in the gay community, and they got all this stuff about you. Yo sé que eso no es verdad, pero that's what they're putting all around the neighborhood. And I say it's embarrassing because I never corrected her. I said, yo voy a tener que averiguar si eso es verdad. Seguro que era verdad. How far have we come, right? La misma señora today, right, will come up to me and say, ay, mira qué bueno que el hijo mío he's come out, he's organizing an event for you, y qué bueno que yo voy a estar. That's the difference. I go to the gay parade. I remember these two guys, they come up to me and they go, mira Gutiérrez, what are you doing here? And I said, no. La pregunta no es qué yo estoy haciendo aquí. I'm an elected official on a float waving to people, to a constituency that I hope votes for me, and I want to show some solidarity, right, during the gay pride parade, right? La pregunta es, ¿qué tú haces aquí? And they were school teachers. The next year, they held the banner, and we marched together. They went from being somebody who were cheering people to somebody who was marching in the parade. So I think we've come a long way. Remember, lo que parece hoy imposible, mañana tú dices, la verdad es que no fue tan difícil nada. Si te compromete a justicia social, right? And to fight bigotry and racism and prejudice, it's all around us. So thank you guys for allowing me to be part. I hope what I've had to say is helpful to your conference and your policy. Thank you so much.
Goodbye. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you, Congressman. That was fantastic. Just as we're transitioning here, we're going to have an opportunity to delve into the conversation a little bit more and hearing from our amazing panel of experts. I'd like to ask the panel to make their way to the stage, please. And to introduce the panel, I'd like to bring up Julio Rodriguez, who is a co-founder of ALMA, and also my board member. And if you don't know Julio, he is an amazing, amazing man with an amazing story to share. And he's such a generous civic leader. And just one thing I want to share about him is that he's the recent award recipient of the Astria Foundation's Lifetime Achievement Award for his work in the LGBTQ community. Welcome, Julio Rodriguez.
Thank you, Sol. And it's funny that you'd get a lifetime achievement and I'm still alive, so I'm very happy about that, because I have a lot of work to do. First of all, wasn't that great to hear our congressman? And I will tell you, it wasn't just Luis. We owed a lot of debt to Chuy Garcia, because when he was in the city council, it was him and Luis together who stood up for our rights. And I think that's really important because they really were alone. Because they were the two Latinos, and they really took a risk. And so I also want to acknowledge Chuy and the work that he did at that time. In 1986, I was still not quite out. So, I know it was great to see one of my own supporting me in that way. So I want to, before I introduce our illustrious panel, because all three of these folks are great, and we're going to hear not only about their perspective on the issues, but also some concrete ideas about what can we learn, not only from the LGBT movement, but what can we learn as two communities coming together to really leverage our resources, our ideas, and our communities. Because the one thing that I've learned in organizing is that you're never in this work alone if you reach out. And you're gonna hear about how do you do that, and how do you do that in a strategic way. But I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention my board, who's here, and I'd like them to stand up. This is the board of the Association of Latinos and Latinas Motivating Action. So, thank you. It's Pride Month, so you got to out everybody. I also want to recognize members of the LGBT Immigrant Rights Coalition because they're here, and we were one of the member organizations that helped form that group. And if those folks that are here from Affinity, from the coalition can just stand up or raise their hands, I would really love that too. So, Mike, stuff, just to let people know that you're here, because we've been doing a lot of work around this issue, and we're going to continue to do work. So, with that said, I have the honor of introducing you to three amazing people, and I'm going to start with our state representative, Kelly Cassidy. So, Kelly represents the 14th district in Illinois, which is actually mine. And she's actually my neighbor, or has been my neighbor a couple times. So that's been great. She is an organizer, a legislative director, a mom. Kelly Cassidy has spent the last 20 years living her values, whether it's fighting for women's issues or the LGBT community, as an activist, working for her smarter criminal justice. She's been working on a smarter criminal justice system within the state's attorney's office. She's ensuring that boys are safe in these places. She has been an advocate for lots of issues related to women, to immigrants' rights. She's been activist around a lot of issues in the state legislature. She has worked on a number of bills to really advance the issue of immigration, and we are really lucky to have her here. Accompanying Kelly is David Monar, the CEO and president of the Howard Brown Health Center, and that's a recent move. Prior to that, David Monar was with the AIDS Foundation of Chicago, and he has been with the AIDS Foundation for a number of years. He was a policy director, and he did a lot of work to advance the work of the HIV/AIDS community, and has been a true advocate and activist, actually, in the field of AIDS. And we are lucky to have him here as well. The last panelist that we have here is Moses Hernandez, and he's with Latinos Progresando. And he, too, has been a strong advocate and member of the immigration community and has done a lot of work. His organization and he himself have done a lot of work in the community, really helping to get immigrants to understand their rights, to get access to legal services, and to really move this agenda forward. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually turn it over to Representative Kelly Cassidy, and she's going to talk a little bit about her experience and her perspective as it relates to immigration and the LGBT community.
Thank you so much. I'm really so pleased to be here. I get to represent a pretty amazing district. I have what is considered the most diverse district in the state. And in fact, we have the most diverse zip code in the United States within our district. We have a very high population, the highest population in the state of refugees. It is really an amazing district that literally runs the gamut from sort of one of the fanciest, most fabulous neighborhoods in the city to folks who are arriving and finding their way. And it gives me such a great blessing to be able to represent a district that really demands the full gamut and supports incredibly progressive policies. So I'm very grateful. I think that this panel is hugely important, both as we continue to move forward on LGBTQ rights, but as we really, really get into the meat and potatoes of comprehensive immigration reform in this country. Because there are great parallels and there are great lessons to be learned from each other in both directions. I think that, and I think David will probably speak to this even more, the real, true turning point around LGBT issues really came out of the HIV/AIDS crisis, because then it was a matter of life and death to be visible and to destigmatize being gay. Then that's all we talked about, was being gay. We didn't have so many letters in our alphabet soup. And that really led to great steps forward as people came to know who we were and came to realize that we didn't have three heads and we weren't scary and dangerous. We became more that mainstream storyline that Congressman Gutierrez talked about. You know, the sitcom character who is the only sane person in the room on many occasions. That made an enormous difference in our movement and in our ability to secure rights. But there's also it's critical to recognize that the pendulum continued to swing back and forth throughout that process. You know, we were making great strides forward, in particular at the local and state levels, with civil rights laws, and even starting to begin some of the domestic partnership registry pieces, when in the early 90s we saw a tremendous backlash against the community when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was imposed by a president that was our ally, by a president that actually counted on our votes in a large way for his election victory. And I think we're seeing parallels with this presidency and the immigration community. We saw DOMA passed during that time. The Defense of Marriage Act passed during that time. So one of the critical lessons is to not be too disappointed, not to be too discouraged. Be disappointed, actually. Be as disappointed as we should be, but don't be too discouraged, because there is a natural pendulum swing there. The other big lesson I think that we can take out of this year's massive victory with marriage equality is two things. One is the importance of coalition work and the importance of following through on that coalition work. I, as a member of the LGBT community, am committed and dedicated to ensuring that our community pays it forward, because we had huge help from our coalition partners, including the immigrant rights community, and we saw some backlash against ICER for that partnership, and what we saw was many of us stepping up to make sure that those funding attacks were responded to appropriately. But it's also keeping in mind that marriage isn't necessarily the capstone, it's the tipping point. And that's another big piece of looking at the continuum of comprehensive immigration reform. Whether we get it incrementally or we get it all at once, know that, you know, as activists, I think a lot of folks in the LGBTQ community believe, oh, we did it, I'm gonna take my wedding cake and go home. That's not the case. And once we get comprehensive immigration reform passed, that's not going to be the end of the story either, because everyone who has achieved that reform and achieved the rights that come along with that reform are still going to require services. There's still going to be folks left behind, and there will still be work to be done. So those activists that we have developed, those activist muscles that have been formed, will have to continue to be utilized, not just to finish the job, but to continue to carry the ball forward along with the coalition partners, because there may be issues that come up that coalition partners need us for. And so we have to stay at the table and we have to stay engaged, both in terms of being good coalition partners and defending against backlash. Some of the parallels I see within the two movements, the Dreamers were a great way to begin to change the narrative. And so while it was a good victory in and of itself, it was an enormous step forward in that we were able to start to change the dialogue and change the narrative. We were no longer hearing about the lazy immigrant. We were no longer hearing about the drain on our resources. We were hearing about bold and strong and beautiful kids who wanted to make our country stronger. And that is key, and it's huge, and it's critical. We're hearing a new narrative on the deportations. We're seeing the ugly, dark side of deportation. No longer the get them out of here, send them back where they came from, go home. But the families that have been torn apart, the incredible injustices that have been done. And these are hugely important that we continue to push that new dialogue. And we're seeing the backlash as well. Congressman Gutierrez talked about the unaccompanied youth. That's a piece of the backlash. There's no doubt in my mind that that's a piece of the backlash. I've got one of the shelters right around the corner from my house, where the kids wait to find members of their families, and it's heartbreaking. As a mom of kids who are actually older than many of these kids who are making this journey alone, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I couldn't send my kids alone to school, much less across multiple borders through God only knows what hell. The idea that looks like a better option than staying where they are should be as compelling as it needs to be, but it's not yet. As a child of immigrants, I will stand with anyone to both tell that story, because when I say that I have an immigration story, I get but you're a nice white girl from the north side look, That's part of it. That's part of the destigmatization. When my dad came, they were the folks taking everyone's jobs. They were the ones running from poverty. And so it is important that when I talk about why I believe in being engaged in democracy, when I talk about why it's so important that everyone votes, I tell that story of my dad coming here with $10 in his pocket and no idea what he was going to do when he got off that boat. And I tell the story of walking to the polling place every year with my dad, hearing that story about why we were walking to the polling place. And I tell it for very specific reasons, mostly because people go, oh, you have that story too. I talk about it in terms of I tell my children their birth story every year, and I tell my children their grandfather's immigration story every year, because we continue to have to pass that along. Another good piece that we did as a community was fighting on multiple fronts. So incremental change, but also recognizing that there are legislative victories and there are court victories, and being prepared to fight all of those battles. And then my final piece, because I know that everybody has a lot to add here, is, and Congressman Gutierrez pointed to this a little bit, and I remembered the importance of it, because he's been the master of this. The inside versus outside strategy. I can stand up on the House floor and I can be very polite and I can talk about the importance of good policy. My power is made much greater by someone outside screaming bloody murder and being willing to risk everything for that activist change that is part and parcel of making progress. And I'll be out there screaming bloody murder with you too, and then I'm going to go inside and talk about it in very polite terms and talk about incremental change. Both fronts are important. This is at best, in its best function, a symbiotic relationship. It should not be an adversarial one. It is a perfect and wonderful symbiotic relationship that has to be nurtured and has to be encouraged. When I hear from members of the General Assembly, can't you get them to calm down? Can't you get them to shut up? Hell no. I don't want them to. In fact, when I'm done talking to you, I'm going out there and standing with them. And some of the best folks are able to cross back and forth. You know, when Luis or Jan Schakowsky get arrested alongside hundreds of activists, that draws the attention in ways that the activists alone couldn't necessarily get. But without those activists standing with them, it doesn't carry the same message. So that is the best symbiotic relationship, the best way that it can benefit all of us. And I think that we have to be mindful of that and be mindful that you can't just have one strategy and you can't just say, okay, we've got 3 openly gay members of the General Assembly, there are a few of us on the City Council, we're here, we're there, it's all good. It's never all good. There's always opportunity for backlash, and so we have to always be mindful that the streets are as powerful as the halls of power. So, thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear me? I'm not sure we can. So I'm very grateful to be part of this panel, to be part of this question. Many thanks to ALMA and Latino Policy Forum. I think that the question that we're posed this morning is really a provocative one for me, which is, how do we amass political power for a marginalized group? I mean, that's sort of for me, the question that connects the LGBT struggle and for liberation and equality, issues around HIV/AIDS, and responding to the health crisis for a very marginalized group, as well as immigration reform. And I guess I was also grateful to hear Congressman Gutierrez's remarks. Made me think about kind of the arch of the struggle that I've been most affiliated with, which has been working to respond to the HIV/AIDS crisis. And most of you, or many of you, I hope you saw the HBO special, The Normal Heart, which was which showed Larry Kramer's play about the early days of the AIDS crisis. And I think that's a place where I wanted to start, because it was the very beginning of the AIDS crisis. In 1981, 82 in New York City. The dawning of the AIDS epidemic. We didn't even know it was AIDS. We didn't even know it was causing, these deaths among gay men. People were literally dying rapidly, mostly in their 20s and 30s, and nobody cared. Nobody wanted to do a thing, and that's how it started. And in fact, there was tremendous anxiety in the gay community about, how do we talk about this? What if it's sexually transmitted? What will it do to, our sense of community, our sense of liberation? Will we as gay people be quarantined? Will there be a backlash? Will we be hated? will we be outed? And then the political establishment, almost laughing and saying, well, they're getting what they deserve, and so that's really, that's been the struggle that the HIV/AIDS movement has been dealing with for 35 years and trying to turn that around. And I wanted to start that because I think there are lessons from the very early, in the Normal Heart and from the very early days. One being, again, this inside-outside strategy that you see played out in the movie and on the play, where there's, an established group beginning to respond for the needs of people, and there was very grassroots, in someone's living room, trying to provide education and services. But even then, immediately a radical, angry group was splintered out of it that had to be more in the streets, direct action, demanding change. We saw that at the very beginning. And I think what we don't see there is also how important it was to seat and find allies in the corridors of power. So I'm grateful for Representative Cassidy, for Congressman Gutierrez. I think I don't want to underscore how important it is that we nurture allies, in the halls of power, that we continue to vote, that we continue to elect them, and that we continue to educate and bring people into our quarter. So that's an important lesson. Thinking about thinking about the work around HIV/AIDS at the federal level, at least, and in some ways in the local level. We've done a just tremendous amount of organizing and issue organizing and campaign work. And that work has really forced us to look hard at the populations most affected by HIV/AIDS, trying to define ways, incremental ways that we can advance the cause of prevention, of care, of research, of housing, of other ways to respond to the needs, and putting, really laying down a plan and sticking to it that really focuses on honing the science, honing public opinion, changing institutional norms, and sticking to a time frame. Because everything has has a time frame, and kind of being attentive to that time frame is important. Whether it's the legislative cycle, whether it's the cultural cycle, there's a window of opportunity. And I think we even see that even in this very thorny immigration reform environment, right now with the president coming out and saying, we should be doing better for these young migrants who are stuck in our system, who have crossed multiple borders, have survived miraculously, and now are languishing, in our federal prisons. They're basically in lockup until their situation can be adjudicated. That's pulling at, there's an interesting story there for me because it's pulling at the cultural, who cannot relate to the tragedy of these families. And Congress is being forced to deal with this, and the president is being forced to deal with this, and this is just a cultural opportunity that we have to utilize. And thinking about HIV/AIDS, there's been some very important gains that were made, both federally and at the state level and local level, that were campaigns that were focused on securing rights and programs and funding that were directly related to the HIV/AIDS costs. And probably the most important one there is the 1990 passage of the Ryan-White Care Act, which is today a $2.2 billion annual appropriation for a full continuum of services to respond to HIV/AIDS. So, and that's been in place, and that has really given us the instruments to make a big dent in advancing a safety net for people living with affected by HIV who are facing dire unmet needs. But then there's been a whole series of other advances that actually were not, if you looked at them, they were not directly HIV related, but they had enormous HIV benefits. So in the 1990s, there was a huge campaign, multi-sectoral, to double funding for biomedical research at the NIH, at the National Institutes of Health, and really take advantage of, the plethora, the renaissance of science to make a difference in the lives of people through a whole host of different conditions, from cancer to diabetes to autoimmune diseases to HIV. And this was a bipartisan effort. And we secured a doubling of the NIH budget without strings, allowing the scientists at the NIH to set scientific priority. And as a result of that campaign and that effort, HIV research on basic immunology, virology expanded tremendously. Many of the advances that we enjoy today in HIV are a result of that effort. But it was not, it was not an HIV effort alone. People who suffer from cancer, diabetes, many other conditions benefited. Another one is the Americans with Disabilities Act, also 1990, to protect the rights of people with a disability. Again, had enormous benefits for securing rights and protections for those of us stigmatized by HIV, but also many other conditions. And the most important one that we're living right now is the Affordable Care Act. This law change allowing expansion of public and private health insurance, regardless of your health status, is so significant for HIV/AIDS. Most of us with HIV have been locked out of public and private insurance unless we're in group-based insurance. Of course, we're not the only constituency group benefiting, but here's an example of how another issue that advanced lended to our incremental progress on our fight. And I will say that we've also contributed, HIV/AIDS has contributed to immigration reform. So in 2008, reauthorization of what's called PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, ended a 2 decades long ban against adjusting status for immigrants who are HIV positive. This was enormous. What it meant was for individuals who had legal opportunities to adjust their status, either through marriage or through asylum or through another means, were categorically stuck and not allowed to adjust their status simply because they were HIV positive, and simply because of a law put in place by Congress 2 decades earlier that deemed us as people with HIV a danger to public health. And there was massive efforts to try to overturn that restriction, that law. And we only were able to do it by amending this global AIDS effort called PEPFAR, President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. It was kind of snuck in as an amendment to that, but it made an enormous difference for hundreds or thousands tens of thousands of individuals who were really literally in limbo. They had all the tools to adjust their status. Because of their HIV status, they were not able to. So, I guess the lessons that I would leave you with is, to think about some of those other concurrent social agendas that could advance immigration reform. Certainly, we have some in front of us in terms of family unification, child welfare. We see those immediately in what's happening right now and what will be happening this summer with the President's request to Congress. Drug policy reform. I think, Congressman really told us, kind of this dramatic story about how, our drug policy is contributing to demand and destabilizing countries of origin and resulting in families needing to cross the border. So that's, obviously the economic policy agenda around jobs and business development is one that, I think we have to completely exploit. Because it's powerful, it's real, and we can measure it with good data. I would include criminal justice policy, because that's one that expands the pool of communities that will benefit. We have a prison industrial complex that's harming millions of families across the country, and particularly communities of color. And here's a place where we could align our issues and build coalition. Education policy, and I think the Dreamers have really done an excellent job of showing us those potentials. So I would agree with Representative Cassidy about a diverse coalition. We cannot do this alone as undocumented people because undocumented by definition don't have the political power to do so. So we're going to need to make sure that we at a minimum bring in the diverse populations of immigrant-aligned communities that vote. That's a place to start, and it has to be larger than the Latino community, and probably larger than just first generation. We have to go deeper. We have to think about these other ways of building a diverse coalition. And we have to be really targeted and outcomes oriented and not give up. I mean, I think persistence is really a big lesson. You know, anything that, you know, today, you know, we taught, you know, we're, you know, with the Pride Festival, celebrating kind of the rapid change culturally, politically around marriage equality. But this was not easy. And this was not a slam dunk. And, you know, we were, you know, I think, you know, Congressman Gutierrez said it right. I mean, you know, 10 years ago when there was talk about marriage equality, you know, people laughed. You know, that would never be possible in our culture, in our society. That is just going too far. That's dreaming too big. But persistence pays off, you know, and we see it now. Now it just seems, now we're at the opposite end of the spectrum. We know that the states will continue to fall, even the red states. So those are some of the things that kind of were brought to me when I was thinking about this. I'll turn it over.
Thank you, David. And wow, what a tremendous wealth of information just in the room. A little bit of my background. I'm an immigrant from Mexico, and just my personal connection is I grew up in Lakeview, so I mean, I remember the AIDS crisis. And I'm going to share a little bit of history with you, because I remember when my gay friends in DC pointed this out to me, I remember saying, yeah, and you know what, I'm going to mention this every time I can. The AIDS crisis was such a dark, scary time. And we had a president that for years refused to even acknowledge. That's how inconsequential they thought this community could be. I mean, that's offensive, that's morally reprehensible, you know, but that's what our leaders thought. That's how highly they thought they could regard this community. I mean, there's cause for celebration where we are today. I mean, that is an extraordinary, that's in my lifetime. I'm not that old. You know, that's early 80s. So that, I mean, well, and with that, I want to also give you a friend of mine highlighted this for me the other day when we were talking about this presentation, so that you have a sense of just what an incredible journey this has been for this community. I'm going to give you 2 years, 1952 and I'm going to get that date wrong. Yeah, January of 1962. 1962, January of 62 was when Illinois, the first state to abolish the felony sodomy laws in the US. Before that date, it was a felony for consensual same-sex relationships throughout the whole US. Illinois was the first one to turn the tide on that. That's 1962. 1952 was when the current immigration code that we are still operating under was written. How are we doing on that? Wow, right? I mean, that's what I think when I think of those numbers. So first, it's so many things. I'm going to make a few comments just on kind of some of what we've heard here today, and then I was asked to speak a little bit about if wholesale, you know, big ticket item, if you will, comprehensive immigration reform is not in play right now, what might be feasible, or what are some of the piecemeal elements that we may want to ask for. But first, so much has been said here, and I'll just highlight from my experience. You know, I'm an immigrant from Mexico, grew up in an immigrant community. Let's be frank about attitudes in our own communities. I grew up with all the mean-spirited, stereotypical things being said about our gay brothers and sisters, right? So how did I get here today? My teachers, my friends, you know. So thank you. We need to do that in the immigrant community. It's not these villains out there. These are our family members. You know? These are our friends. So the power of narrative, several people mentioned it. That's incredibly powerful. A child who came from Central America on a train, wow. You know, we have these powerful narratives. We need to make sure we pay attention to them. There's incredible power in story. So that's one. That's one of the things we've witnessed. And there's memory, right? David just talked about all these moments where things happened that advanced the battle for equality. If we don't have that collective memory, we're duped. And we're never, and we will be duped repeatedly unless we hold, our leaders aren't going to lead if we don't matter. And the way we matter is, and this is what this community, I think, has shown us so much. You organize, you vote, you are an economic power, and you are unrelenting. Anybody, you guys remember that part in Exodus where Pharaoh wakes up and says, yeah, I've been an a-hole long enough. I think I need to let these Israelites go. That's never going to happen. That's not the way it works. We have to organize. We need to be, first we need to herald our resources. When I was fresh out of college and I lived with my roommate who was on the board of Howard Brown back then, I remember they had meetings in our house to just talk fundraising and other stuff that they were doing. And I remember thinking, wow, there's nothing this community can't do. Some of the brightest, hardworking people organizing around something they care about. These are lawyers, doctors, community organizers, healthcare specialists, and this is just a group of 4 or 5 people around my dinner table. That was an education to me, saying, we see the stuff on the news, somebody got up and screamed that something was wrong and they had been denied equal access. That's important too, that's important too. But it doesn't just happen by showing up and screaming. I thought, this is what happened. I had the keen sense that I was witnessing the real instruments of change. You get knowledgeable, competent, passionate, committed people who are going to do the heavy lifting. And it's been decades and decades of that, right? Pharaoh didn't wake up and say, okay, I've been a jerk. That never happens. You don't change power structures that way. You you take over the narrative. The narrative, what was the narrative in the 80s? Let's go back to that. Everybody, well, not even that far back. The nefarious homosexual agenda that was going to destroy everything good and dear. How did that change? Because Pharaoh woke up and said, it's time to stop. No, that's not how things change, right? So, organization, and that means something, again, that the LGBT community has done so well. You put your money where your mouth is. Concerted, persistent, organized. David said so many terrific things. Outcome-oriented. And another thing, incremental change has been important part of this struggle. Don't let the perfect or the great be the enemy of the good. If I can't have citizenship for everybody, I'll have nothing. Congressman Gutierrez pointed this out. That is, strategically speaking, that often leaves you with nothing. So there's so many lessons to learn, but my 2 big ones was narrative. Remember the stories, keep the stories alive, and I'm not saying that just for sentimental reasons. How do you hold your politicians accountable? Because there's somebody in the room that remembers when they got up and said, "Not those people. They're here to steal our jobs, or they're here to ruin our education, whatever." There's a reason people value stories throughout history. There are many different things that happen when you share your story as a community, as individuals, as families. I think we know, and I think the LGBT community has shown us that. Right? This was a small play, right? That was just on HBO. That started as a small play. I remember that. Why is it on HBO? Why is it okay for HBO to take a chance on that? It's not even a chance anymore. That's how much the dialogue has changed in our country. So, those are just a few of the lessons. Now, turning to immigration policy, wholesale big reform is dead is the general consensus, that right now nothing's going to happen during the Obama administration. What can happen piecemeal? What are some things and this is not a wholesale reorganizing of the immigration code. These are just some incremental things that we as service providers who work with immigrants every day and families that are split one way or another, either split status or split across countries because of our broken immigration system. Speaking of narrative, just one point under that. The immigration system is much bigger than the, whatever they put the number at, 11 million undocumented. That's now become a convenient, kind of red herring. Don't do anything about this broken system because these 11 million, no one wants to deal with it. It's a lot bigger. And we're going to wake up one day, and if we don't deal with our immigration problem, and we're going to be the third, fourth economic power in the world, because those 11 million. I mean, so when we talk about immigration, our broken immigration system, make sure you're not diverted by that sleight of hand that says it's about 11 million undocumented. It's about a lot more. It's about justice for our families that have status. It's about everybody who loves or cares or has somebody in their life that is an immigrant. It's about everyone who has an immigrant story in their family. It's about our global economic compatibility. Guess what? If I'm the top engineer graduating from MIT and I have Germany, Bombay, and the US offering me jobs, and the US says, yeah, and maybe if you bring your wife and kids over in 9 years, you may be able to stay here permanently, whose job offer am I going to take when I go develop the next Google or internet or whatever? You know, I'm on a plane to Bombay or Holland or Germany because that is a huge issue in our immigration system. Our immigration laws across the board are outdated, inefficient, and we need to, so it's not just about the undocumented. That's just one point I wanted to make. Some things that can be done incrementally that would make a huge impact on many families' lives. 245I, bring back 245I. 245I is a provision of law that allowed individuals who were here, had fallen out of status or hadn't entered lawfully, but otherwise have access to legalization through an adult child, through a spouse, through a family member, but they can't legalize here because they have to leave the country. And the laws are so punitive that the minute you leave the country, then you have a whole series of other bars that you may or may not overcome after you spend a few years at the consulate, if you even qualify to ask for waivers. 245I allowed you to pay a fee, legalize here, because you already have a basis to legalize through that family member or employer. That's one. The 3 and 10-year bars. This is one of the kind of just mean-spirited provisions that was created in the 90s, and it basically says if you've been here, the minute you leave, we got a gotcha provision so that you can't come back, regardless if you have otherwise perfectly valid basis under our already existing laws to legalize. Another provision in 96 also, there's always been a misrepresentation bar under immigration that you can have waived if you merit a waiver of it. In 96, we modified that to split off any false claim of citizenship from other misrepresentations. And if you have the false claim of citizenship, you are now barred from ever legalizing, with one very unreasonable exception. If your parents were citizens at the time and you believed you were a citizen, and you can show that. Again, and how does that happen? Most people who've gone to get a driver's license, many of them end up being registered to vote, which is a privilege of citizenship. And there you go, there's your permanent bar. Of course, expand the DREAM Act, and also lessons in the DREAM Act. Those young people did a lot of things right. They were visible, they were unrelenting, and they changed their narrative. They weren't these villainous, lazy people coming to steal your piece of the pie. They were young, intelligent, hardworking kids who wanted to contribute to the society. Registry, maybe. Now I'm dreaming big. Registry is the only provision of law left on time, which says if you've been here unlawfully since 1972, January, I believe, of 72, and can show your continued presence, paying taxes, no criminal bars, you can legalize. Okay. 72, I was 3 years old or something. That's crazy. Or change just the adjustment law, the 245A, which right now is the one that it's the law under which you legalize here in the U.S., but allow people who otherwise have basis to be petitioned to legalize, because there are so many bars under the existing system. So that would make a tremendous. And none of this is changing the immigration system. It's just modifying it so that it actually works. That's the main problem. You have this, imagine if you were driving a 1952 car, trying to get your kids to school on time and, an expressway before there were expressways. It's kind of what we're doing with this immigration policy.
That's a great
Okay?
analogy.
And bring in advocates, bring in partners into this battle. Of course, with DOMA being gone, LGBT community now is dealing with these same struggles. And so, that's an opportunity for alliances. Like I said, right, you don't take the wedding cake and go home. There's a lot of work for all of us to do. And all of us means all of us out there as well. Thank you.
So I'm going to open it up to questions in just a few minutes, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the panel a couple questions that I'd like you all to respond to. And I think the first one is really about what the congressman said about how states like California and New York are sort of trying to create their own immigration policies and make their states sort of the unique place within the country. And that has been something that even within the LGBT movement we've done, where states have sort of led the way. So what do you think some things that are going on in Illinois that can really be good examples of leading the way around the issue of immigration based on some of the stuff we've done around LGBT issues?
Well, I think it is a great example because, when we were, and I saw David making this note, sort of the trajectory of marriage, when we first started moving down that path, we did domestic partnership registries in cities and like tiny little villages and townships. Oak Park did a domestic partnership registry. And the immediate question was, what good is that? What's that gonna do? That doesn't really convey any benefits. And I think that the closest parallel would be sort of what we've been doing around sanctuary counties, sanctuary cities. When he said that about doing a state citizenship thing, my little wheels started turning, because it is very much that same sort of thing. It may not necessarily work, per se, but it will work in that what we did around those registries, around provision of health benefits, around going from a city registry or a village registry to state benefits to federal benefits, as you're working both in a legislative and a litigation strategy, part of what you're doing is building that critical mass. And so as we continue, I love the idea. I'm actually going to run home and start working on it because I think it's brilliant. I think it is exactly, that is the best parallel I could describe. And sort of doing the Illinois DREAM Act is another example of it. All of those bits and pieces get us a little step further down the road. That ultimately works. And it is about that critical mass. It is that tipping point, both in terms of legislators looking at it, but courts looking at it in terms of, sort of taking the temperature. I've said forever that politicians evolve much more slowly than humans. And it's incredibly true. There's a dearth of leadership among folks who stand for election every 2 years and are looking to that 50% plus one. There aren't a whole lot of us down there who would be more than willing to lose for the right reason. And I wish there were more of us. But so that critical mass, that all the cool kids are doing it thing does work.
Yeah, on the immigration side, the thing that gives me most anxiety is proposals from the GOP for provisions that bar individuals from citizenship. And that proposal is out there. It creates a lot of anxiety for me, that we're going to create a permanent second-class citizen group. And also it also just flies in the face of what I know, about my community. My parents were both legal immigrants to the U.S., naturalized in the 1970s, never missed an election in their lives, never, paid their taxes. My mom was a school teacher for 30 years. Just, model citizens, but that's exactly what is fearful for opponents is, we will be model citizens, and we will use our, the power conferred to citizenship, against them. I mean, that is precisely why it's being opposed. But I can also think, I think, taking a lesson from, the marriage registry to civil union to marriage equality, I think there may be incrementalism there. If we can make some gains and then continue to, as long as we keep our eye on the prize, we cannot live in a society that has a permanent, class of people that is permanently disenfranchised by just their country of origin, and how they adjusted their status, But I could see how that might be possible, or I'm more hopeful now than I was when I walked in the room. Let me just say, it's not my first preference, but we've got to accept some compromises and continue to press forward. And I do think the more we continue to make incremental progress, sort of like marriage equality, we're going to come to a place where we say, well, why would we keep this class of people who now we confer, the right to, the right to a driver's license, a working visa, paying taxes, serving the military, going to our educational institutions, contributing to our society, building their families, buying property, doing everything that everyone does, and yet they are disenfranchised from voting. I think we will get to a tipping point where society will say, that's not fair, that's not right. We've created this other class. And and I do think that even that will be difficult because, again, I think what's fearful for our opponents is that we are just like them. We could be just like them. We could exercise our rights in a democracy just like them. We could, our marriages, our unions will not destroy, Western civilization or somebody's heterosexual marriage. So that's very unnerving. It's easy to say and to try to profess it. And then when it happens, it's like, oh, the world is still spinning. No, nothing has really changed. So I think, but that is a big debate, and I think we have to enter that incrementalism with our eyes wide open, because if we make progress, we have to, any incremental progress, we have to be ready to continue to push and not let go until we've actually secured full rights for individuals who we are bringing into society. We cannot accept permanently that they will be treated in perpetuity as less than full contributing members of our.
Kind of like the civil union trap.
Yeah.
You said that's all you wanted, and now you're back for marriage.
Will you talk about that?
Yeah.
Please?
I'm sorry. It made me think of this. As at every step along the way, it's important, in particular, that the elected officials, but also the activists, say this isn't good enough, but we'll take it for now. Because in particular, because we moved to marriage so quickly from civil unions, one of the biggest hurdles we had to face was, last year when you passed civil unions, you said that's all you wanted. Well, first of all, nobody said that. The lead sponsor of civil unions actually said in debate, and we'll be back. But it's important to not convey the idea that this half a loaf is good enough. I remember a debate many years ago where a representative said, people tell us half a loaf is better than no loaf at all, but I'm standing here with a bag of crumbs. We should not settle for that.
In getting into the kind of legal nuts and bolts, important distinction to make, because not all battles are, there are lessons, but not all battles are the same. Just focusing on the marriage equality. Marriage, in our federalist kind of arrangement of government, marriage has always historically been an issue for each state to legislate and regulate and administer at a statewide level. So in that way, DOMA was an anomaly. It was big Godzilla crawling out of the nuclear cesspool, right? It had, what is the federal government doing, passing legislation saying that marriage is, what marriage is? States, since it's the foundation of this country, that's been their job, that's been their territory. So it's important to note that. So the battle of incrementally attacking at a state level and saying this, and is really kind of a state reclaiming, saying, wait, we've always figured out what marriage means, and so the strategic battle to, if you will, win territory state by state till the tide turned, and then it could have been, I imagine part of the game plan might have been DOMA. Eventually, Congress will have to say, okay, that's stupid and that's not going to hold water. But luckily, something happened before that, and the Supreme Court came out right on that decision, and they and that settled that issue. Immigration policy has always been a federal jurisdiction issue. So there are things states can do, should do, but it's important to be clear that the state of Illinois can't give anybody U.S. status or citizenship, but there are things they can do, and that doesn't mean we don't fight this at a local level. There are many things we can do. I mean, certainly one of the ones that pressure should be made to that states can bring pressure to bear on the federal authorities is saying, you know what, our counties, our municipalities, our jails are not going to spend our taxpayer dollars for you to subsidize a for-profit, disgusting business of incarcerating people with no risk to the community. The reason many of our incarceration policies exist are to make profits for the industry that houses people. And that's, yes, I think the states could definitely be leaders in something like that, saying we are not going to play ball because we're not going to spend our resources to facilitate this very nasty practice that is victimizing our families, regardless of status. So there are, but just, we don't want we do not want, first, we're not going to. We're not going to change the federal system where now states dictate immigration. There's a reason we have a constitution, because that would be a disaster. But there are local battles to be fought to create pressure and to push back on. The problem at the federal level is inaction, complete inaction. So but there are battles. But I just want to highlight, legally there's a different scheme of laws around these two different issues, which is, and not to discount the importance of taking lessons, strategic lessons, and all sorts of lessons from the two battles, but just to make that important distinction, because what you do not want, Alabama and Georgia and North Dakota being, each having their own immigration law, and then saying maybe that's the bad plan. That's all.
I think one of on this jurisdictional issue, which is super important, is a good example might be the lessons from fights for medical cannabis or even recreational cannabis. So there's federal legislation or federal law, controlling use of cannabis, and yet states are pressing forward, including Illinois, that has now enacted into law a pilot with Representative Cassidy's assistance around medical cannabis. And so I think there are ways to work that, that pressure. I don't know if you want to talk about it. But that's an interesting one where states are ahead of the feds, and in many cases, there's a lot of legal ambiguity around that issue, and it's scary, but it is creating a tension, purposefully creating some tension between those the legal jurisdiction, and trying to create that pressure where the feds will have to re-examine their federal laws.
That's an excellent analogy, and you're absolutely right. We don't want a patchwork of immigration laws, and I don't think that's even California's intention.
Right.
I think California's intention is exactly what David pointed out around the cannabis laws. And around cannabis laws, we've seen changes on the federal level. There are now changes to banking rules because there are legitimate businesses doing business as cannabis growers and suppliers that were excluded from our banking system. How do you run $1 million business
on cash
in a coffee can? You just can't. So I don't think that even on the cannabis law front, there is a desire to see 50 different cannabis laws around the state. I think it is a desire to use that tipping point concept of getting getting all the way there. And I think that the California declaring their own scheme is not about a hope that, you know, California will be welcoming, but Alabama will never be. It's about pushing the feds to make it so that Alabama is.
Okay, with that said, I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience.
I don't have a question, just wanted to announce that if people can line up so that we can have the questions flow right after.
I was gonna say, really, nobody?
We were brilliant.
We told you everything you need to know.
So I don't want to break up the intellectual conversation, but I actually have a non-wonky question.
Thank you. God bless
For
you.
those of us where you guys are all, you know, talking a lot about continuing to push forward, regardless of the kinds of tensions and pressure that we create. For those of us coming up, though, clearly you all are successful at that, right? But for those of us coming up, what were the inspirational moments? What were those pivotal moments that allowed you emotionally to bear this, right? To be able to continue to move forward, you know, kind of taking this and connecting it to this. If you could answer that.
It was so long ago. You know, I mean, I think about moments like, you know, the pushback against the nomination of Bork to the Supreme Court and the groups that came together around that. And that was probably one of my first really, really intense street actions and being part of that. And you know, really sort of the backlash against that too was energizing. You know, the Archbishop of the tri-state area where I lived in Florida at the time, was issued a blanket excommunication for anyone who participated in that. You know, so there are, but that's almost comical in its own way because it's ridiculous. You're just going to say anybody who was Catholic who stood up against this justice for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But those moments, you know, activists feed each other's souls and support each other. And some of the losses were as energizing as the victories. The Anita Hill hearings and all of us coming together around that were also incredibly energizing and woke a sleeping giant. You know, that year of the woman in '92 was the direct result of just outrageousness. So I mean, I don't know if that's really what you were looking for, but it's what I got.
There's no right answer.
And I'll answer a different question, which is, I mean, I think that these are really complicated issues, you know, that deal with federal law, legal advocacy, strategy, politics, cultural norms. I think it's difficult to, you know, I think it's an important dialogue that we're having. It also can be very difficult to think, how can I possibly lend support to this effort? You know, I have a job, I have a life, I can't, you know, read regulations or bills or spend my time, you know, 24/7 advancing this cause. And I think, I would say, you know, for you, the important thing, one, is to find an advocacy network or a few that are really on top of this issue, that have full-time staff, that are working Capitol Hill, that are working this issue, you know, so, or a local group, you know, so NCLR is a good example, LULAC's in the room, Latinos Progresando, ALMA, I mean, groups that are paying attention to the instruments and the opportunities for change, and have advocacy lists, and will tell their members, you know, this is going to vote, you know, we need you now. You know, so one is find one of those groups and sign up and read what they send you. And two is when they call for action, they say, call your congressperson, call your state representative, sign this petition, do it. It's very, there's no immediate gratification. So you feel like you just, you know, you don't have any response. You know, you might call, you know, a surly receptionist, no offense, at Springfield.
My receptionist is never surly.
No, never surly, not. But, you know, they're just gonna be like, you know, what's the bill? Yeah, you're for or against, you know, what's your name and address? That might be the most you get, you know, or when you call, you know, the White House. But it matters because lawmakers do pay attention. They are counting, you know, how many people actually take the time to pick up the phone and call them and say, I'm for this, I'm against that. And if you're really ambitious, you know, take a piece of paper and write a letter, a handwritten letter. It can be 4 sentences. Nobody sends handwritten letters ever. Your politician will pay attention to that.
I call people who send those.
I know, so I do, and I'm not a politician. A donor sends me a handwritten letter. It's like, oh my God, somebody really took a piece of paper and wrote. That's powerful. So there are ways, and vote. Really pay attention. Vote for people that are supporting the causes that you care about. Those are simple, tangible ways that we can continue to support this effort as a community without, if you're not working as an immigration advocate full time.
Again, vote, yes, of course, vote. And also let people know why you don't support, or when I was at an event last week, and I had an organization I support, but we had differences of opinion on something, and I made sure to find the director and say, you know what, I support your organization, I have for years, and I will continue to do so, but this is an issue on which I feel strongly that you guys made a very bad call. Is everything gonna change tomorrow? No, but I get the feeling he's gonna remember that conversation, and that's how this works, incrementally. So of course vote no, and also be connected, because you're never going to cross the sea alone. You need people. It's tiring, it's tough, it's long term. You need a network of people who support you, educate you, inspire you, and are your moral compass, because you won't always have the right answer. So if you're in it for the long haul, I would say those are all valuable things to have.
Hi, I'm Alicia Tate. I'm on Illinois Attorney General Lisa Madigan's policy team. The other movement that both of these movements have been compared to historically is the civil rights movement, of course. And throughout my career, I've gotten the question many times, how do we get more Black people to support immigration reform? Of course, there are Black folks involved in all of these communities, and it's a diverse community, and we move everywhere. But I'd like to hear, David, you touched on this in terms of building alliances. I think you mentioned around criminal justice issues. I'd like to hear from your perspectives how you see that alliance getting built, because there has been tremendous division in the Black community around both of these issues. And I think part of that is because it's been difficult to figure out how to reach that way and toward that community. So I'm curious your take.
I'll only say one thing I do is I always try to step back and highlight when the conversation that's being had is, or point out, step back and point out and say, hey, wait a minute, let's remember, every time we're fighting about the crumbs, the people holding the loaf have won. And that is not an accident. In from the dawn of time, right? That's always the first strategy. Get the peasants on tier bottom and second to bottom to fight over the crumbs. So just point out that we have a lot more in common as communities, as whether it's large part among many people in the working poor community, the incarceration, the lack of access to health care. There are so many more topics around which we have common ground. I think the at least my sense of it was the kind of splintering, or the kind of the wedge there has been. These immigrants are taking away those basic jobs, right? The jobs. So that's the first one, is to kind of step back and point out, is let's say, who is benefiting by this division? It isn't an accident we keep coming back to this fight over the crumbs. And yet there's so many of us. Why aren't we getting any part of the loaf? So that's one. That's one that our communities often are afflicted with the same underemployment, lack of employment, trouble keeping employment for different reasons. Of course, the criminalization of so many things, the profit incarceration industry. All of these things seem to afflict a lot of our communities, and the lack of access to health care or quality health care. These are all, I think, highlight the commonality in our needs and in our struggles. because none of these struggles are over, right? But that is a really, really significant challenge. I think that's one that we probably need to focus more attention on.
I think fundamentally, we need to recognize that we won't be successful unless we build strong, diverse coalition. It's fundamental. It has to occur. You know, and it's probably true for every issue and every cause, and certainly every cause I've ever worked on. But you know, we're fighting for a group that's by definition disenfranchised. So they don't have power to vote, to elect, to make change possible. So we need a coalition of allies who have power, who are enfranchised, to fight for them. I think we have to build relationships with diverse communities. So we can't begin to understand those commonalities and ways that we can work together if we don't understand what our ally or sister or brother communities are facing and what their needs are and where there's overlap and where there's shared interests. We have to find those shared interests. I think there's a lot of them. When you think about the criminal justice complex and the prison industry, about the police state, about violence and violent communities, about poor educational systems, about poor educational employment and economic systems. So there are lots of shared interests. And then the most important is we also have to reciprocate. This is a big one. Some of the feedback that marriage equality advocates heard from African American lawmakers that was legitimate was, if we stick our neck out and help you, what are you going to do for our needs? We are fighting for expansion of Medicaid services. We want to restore dental coverage for impoverished people who are on Medicaid services. We need more response for reentry assistance. We're going to need the LGBT community there. So we help you. That's what relationships are. Sometimes you're going to work on stuff that's not directly your number one, issue, and you have to reciprocate. So we're going to have to find that's how you build a lasting, long-lasting, productive relationship. Interpersonally, but it also works on issue advocacy as well.
I completely agree with both points here. Acknowledging those differences, though, I think is very key. A lot of times we don't want conflict. We don't want to discuss the things that are driving us apart. And I think utilizing that relationship building, whether it's through faith communities or issues advocacy, to acknowledge that divide, acknowledge those differences, and don't pretend they don't exist. Recognize that, as LGBTQ folks, we are considered as not having issues around poverty and criminal justice issues. The reality is that's not the case, but the perception is and was the reality. That reciprocity piece has to be discussed. It can't be assumed. It has to be very, very clear. A lot of the conversations that I had with colleagues in the Black caucuses in the summer between the failure to call the bill and the passage of the bill were around some of those very things. Some of those calling our differences and pointing out sometimes that they're not really differences. Acknowledging the perception that perhaps the help isn't there on these issues, but then talking about what we have done together and really just having that honest dialogue, I think is and remains hugely important.
I also think there's an opportunity in Illinois on the whole discussion of the minimum wage to bring a lot of communities together. And actually, just yesterday, we were handing out cards around the minimum wage at the Dyke March. And a lot of the questions there were around, why is this an issue for the LGBT community? And as we talked about it, especially a lot of women of color were talking about, well, it is an issue for me. I'm not just a lesbian, I'm an African American lesbian, and things like the questions of poverty and family income are important to me. But I think that's a great opportunity for us to really dialogue across communities to create real change.
I have a question about backlash, specifically looking at women's health and how Supreme Court specifically today has attacked women's health, how do you think, or what are some lessons that you learned from that community and that movement that we can take on the LGBT community and also Latino community to prevent some of that horrible backlash in the years to come?
So I take it, well, we've been up here on the panel, you've been watching Twitter, and the decision came down and it's bad.
Yes.
He's
Awesome.
24.
What's the
So what he's referencing was there were 2 cases on the Supreme Court docket around the issue of birth control access under the Affordable Care Act, and the opportunity for exclusion of that benefit by private corporations on a conscience clause if there's a religious objection to the use of contraception, and in the ongoing theme of corporations as people, apparently the decision has come down against women's access to health care. And that's unfortunate. I had, on the last day of session, I actually had the opportunity to present a bill that will put an advisory referendum on the ballot regarding access to contraception and whether companies should have to provide it. And so that referendum has become that much more important. The interesting piece, and I've had this conversation around women's health and reproductive justice for years. I'm going to go back to visibility because we don't talk about the use of reproductive health care as openly as we talk about being gay. And we perhaps prior to the Dreamers really didn't talk about immigration issues as openly. When I first came into the House, I presented a bill around mandatory ultrasounds for people seeking abortion. And in a conversation with an AP reporter, I said, when I had an abortion, da 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 da, and she was like, ma'am, do you really want to say that? I'm not an idiot. I know I'm talking to a reporter. I happen to have had an abortion for healthcare reasons. I was in fertility treatment. I had a bad outcome. But I was unwilling to say that part of the story to this reporter because I got really pissed at the suggestion that I should be ashamed that I had to access a life-saving procedure. But we don't talk about knowing someone who's had an abortion. We don't talk about someone who needs birth control to stay healthy and work and support her family. And so I think visibility is the big difference. But the fact that we are still having the same conversation about birth control that we had when my mom had to have me in New Jersey, or we lived in New Jersey, she had to cross the state line into Philadelphia in order to give birth to me safely as a 45-year-old woman with a tumor growing in her uterus who had to have it removed at the same time, but New Jersey considered that an abortion. So, we're having the same conversation. I am now in those so-called halls of power, and I had to have a debate as if it was 1972 on the floor of the House. So, visibility, period.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, just remember that the no issue will be just a legislative victory. We're looking for a legislative solution, and the work will begin, when we pass some of these incremental provisions and get them signed into law. Then we have to make sure that they're implemented correctly, that the regulations are interpreted, that there's the infrastructure and the funding to follow them, that there's a legal advocacy to protect them, that there's the educational campaign to reach individuals. I mean, my first job out of college was working on, I'm dating myself, on the first amnesty. So, I came out of college at the tail end of amnesty under Reagan, and individuals who had applied for amnesty then did an application, paid their fees, had to prove that they paid their taxes, had to take citizenship classes, had to learn English as a second language, and then they had to do a whole other application. And so my job was to find those people that had done everything and didn't know that they had one more application. And if they didn't do that last application, they were going to revert to undocumented status, And there were thousands of people that we knew had gone through all of these steps and were months from reverting to being undocumented, because they didn't fill out another form that put their social security number, their address, their name, their INS number, blah, blah, blah. So again, just, it's not just getting the law passed. We're going to have to continue to press forward, continuing to secure the gains that we've made and making sure that people actually benefit.
And expect those setbacks. Because if you do not, then the first day there is when you're gonna cry, go home and call it a day, because there will be, these are long, and they are complicated issues, not to, they are long, complicated issues. I would highlight some of the stuff that's been said already is, it has to happen on many fronts, at the federal level, at the state level, at the legislative level, in the courtrooms, in the culture, at your dining room table,
Right.
in the classroom, that, to take, the reproductive rights. A young woman doesn't get out of college or whatever, out into the world and say, oh, birth control, should I have a right to that? No. If we, there's what household, what politics, church, whatever, educational institutions, it's part of the whole social web, and we have to, if you will, kind of get our message across all of those veins of that network. So it's not just one court, let's wait for the Supreme Court to decide. The Supreme Court has gotten stuff wrong over its history many a times. Luckily, we have, our federal system works pretty well, once upon a time, other human beings were property in this country. That's no longer the case, so we've gotten stuff wrong many a time. We have a system that evolves and changes enough, so there are setbacks, but you have to continue in the battle, and you have to understand that it happens on many levels. That's how social change happens, not just taking it to a court or to the state house or to the Capitol.
So with that said, I'm going to close today. Do we have time for one more?
We have time for one more question.
Okay, one more.
I do want to make a quick comment before I ask my question. I work on the marriage campaign, and to address the question a few questions ago about engaging marginalized communities, one of the ways we engage the African American community was being on the ground every single day on the South Side and engaging community members about being supporters of marriage equality. And we had Black Caucus members' jaws drop at the thousands of supporters that we found in their neighborhoods. So part of engaging communities that you don't see represented is getting out there and talking to them in their neighborhoods. And that's really a huge thing. My question is, as we talk about a comprehensive legislative approach to immigration not really being a possibility right now, and breaking that apart into other pieces, and that being something that the LGBT community has done, we've reached a point in the marriage fight where in many states, things are starting to happen backwards, and people are getting married when they aren't protected in their homes, in their jobs, in basic public accommodations. And every single day we see reports of people being fired from their jobs or being kicked out of their homes just because they changed their status on Facebook. It's wrong. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on the analogies between breaking apart different parts of the immigration conversation, and is there an order that things should be progressing, or just general thoughts about, like, as we see the different parts of things we've done in the LGBT community kind of working against each other as we figure out those problems, is there an analogy as we think about breaking apart immigration?
Wow, that's a terrific and complicated question. Well, my sense, one of the lessons again from the LGBT community is when people get fired or dismissed from a job, my experience tells me that community isn't going home and crossing its arms and saying, oh, well, I guess I get marriage equality, but I don't get equality in employment, right, or housing. So yes, that it makes for a very complicated strategy, but you have to be ready to respond just like we did incrementally, right on the marriage equality front. That is one of the lessons, challenges that we have to be ready to confront if things happen at an incremental level, is be ready to confront those other challenges also in an organized way, which is also to say there are more opportunities to change minds, right? Or find the people there who can be your allies, which was, thank you, what you were doing very much on the ground, it sounds like, on the south side of Chicago, right? So, but yeah, it's going to make everything very, it's going to make it for a tough fight, but we already have a tough fight, right? The minute anything piecemeal or big picture immigration gets proposed, the first wall of resistance, it's all the offensive or unrealistic caricatures, right? These are all, what did congressmen say? They're all coming with bags, 50-pound bags of cocaine strapped to their backs, or whatever that ridiculous comment was. So, I mean, that's going to be the first point of resistance. Be ready to counter the different waves of attack on any of these initiatives. And then if they pass incrementally, you're going to have very complicated other fights that come from that. But I think have a strategy is really the only plan. But you're going to have a strategy on many fronts, which, again, many lessons to be learned there from, the LGBT community. It's about healthcare, it's about all the other issues. And it isn't, let's wait till we get to pipe in. No, you have to take the fight to them aggressively, right? To all those venues.
I think our allies who are pressing this issue on Capitol Hill and the lawmakers like Congressman Gutierrez and Mike Quigley, James Chakowski, and others that are going to be at the forefront, they're going to be thinking very hard and critically about the sequence of incrementalism and how to stage that. And so they're going to need our input on that. But I think fundamentally we should stay focused on a couple things that will help them in that pursuit. One is making sure that the Senate doesn't change hands, doesn't change power structure. We're very likely to send Dick Durbin back to the Senate, which is fantastic. So if you have any ties to another state in the union that has a race that's contentious and can send $10 or $20 or $100 to that campaign, help secure the Senate for the Democratic side that supports immigration reform. That will help. Same with the White House in 2016. And I think all of these things we're going to find out are messy. ACA is really messy. We've been spending a lot of time trying to figure out things like co-pays, coverage for transgender health services, trying to educate people about their options. It's not perfect. It's not even close to perfect. But the visibility and the education, is going to be, it has been key. I mean, we're learning how to help individuals navigate the Affordable Care Act, and then trying to bring to the attention of HHS, the White House, and Congress and others the ways that the law, as designed, is still flawed and how it must be improved. And we're going to have to keep doing that. We're going to have to keep doing that with immigration reform.
So I think to your point about states where you can lose your job or lose your housing, I think that this, even more so than in Illinois, marriage is the domino, not the capstone. Because the ridiculousness of that situation is pointed out to legislators. The sky didn't fall, let's let people keep their jobs. So I think that is a piece of the strategy that has to be in play. The federal response has to be in play. The Employment Non-Discrimination Act has to be in play. And I need to go back to one of the things that you said that I carry around in my brain with me every day on the floor of the House, which is never ever let the perfect get in the way of the good. It might not be ideal that you can lose your job in Indiana, but you can get married. But the incrementalism has its, there's a downside to incrementalism. We want it all. We want it all today. We want it all yesterday. But utilize that win to make up for the loss and keep moving forward. And then I do want to point out back to that interconnectedness, the Hobby Lobby decision does have an impact on the LGBTQ community. States like Arizona that tried to pass conscience clauses, conscience bills for businesses that want to refuse to serve LGBT folks. The desire here to do that, I anticipate we're going to see bills to that effect here. I anticipate we're going to see lawsuits to that effect here. There is an interconnectedness to almost everything we do, and that is something that we have to be mindful about.
Okay. All right, so I'd like to thank our panel.